Alright, I'm making a quick video on this book, Dog Training with the Touch by Tom Rose, and I need a cheek. This is one of my favorite books too. What I really like about this book is that it has a lot of technique on it. So it goes from teaching the finish, recalls, sit, down, protection training, tracking, and it really goes into almost a step-by-step process where you don't necessarily have to read the book from start to finish. You can, you should, but you could actually pick up anywhere and decide, today I want to review more on tracking, or today I want to review more on, on retrieve or the finish, etc., etc. So it's a good reference book. Now, I didn't go to Tom Rose myself. I do know a lot of trainers, I have a lot of friends who have gone there. And this book was one that they recommended. So as soon as I got a hold of it, I dove right into it. Really like it. Again, it's a good reference book. Tom Rose, if you haven't heard much of him, which I'm sure you have, has a lot of experience, has quite an extensive resume. My original instructors, they were Tom Rose instructors at one point. And I can tell that obviously the information is pretty solid, and the book, it's a good reflection of that. So anyways, what I'm going into today is this particular section, the helper. I always like to go back to practically every book, whether I've read it or not, whether I've read it recently or I've read it a long time ago. I'll just crack the book open and just find really good piece of information. Kind of like religious people do with their scriptures, but this is real. Anyway, so going to the helper, introduction. One part that I really like about this section right here: as a helper, you should remember that ultimately it's the trainer's job to make sure his dog is trained properly. You can advise all you want, but if the handler insists on training some other way, that it's their decision. So this really puts things into perspective, because a lot of times as the helper, you feel almost entirely responsible for the dog's progress, and it's not the case. The trainer, the handler should be in control of their dog's training, not you. You're there as a training aid, right? It says your job is to make sure you give the best advice and to develop the dog's drives. Another thing that I really like about here, I just read it not long ago, developing a dog is not something you do overnight. Many people are in a hurry to develop the finished dog. And that's one thing I have seen so many times. I've seen this quite a bit, and it's very unfortunate. I see a lot of people that push dogs quite a lot, very fast. And they do that because either they've had a dog in the past that was able to handle that, or they know people who have the type of dog that is able to handle that. And so they erroneously perceive or erroneously think that because their friend or the person that they've seen, they have a dog that progresses quite fast and they train a certain way, they feel like if they don't do that, they are falling behind. And in reality, that's not the case. Right, so it says many people are in a hurry to develop the finished dog. I've seen that, unfortunately, too many times. They skip steps and put too much pressure in a rush to get to the goal. I've had to deal with this firsthand. Not always the handler's fault, actually. A lot of times it was the fault. The fault was on the helper that they had at the time, that they didn't know what they were doing and they put way too much pressure. And now we have to do a lot of damage control. Now we have to go back several steps because now the dog has had so many bad experiences. So it's very unfortunate when that happens. We're just so much easier to go slower at the dog's pace, and then you make sure the dog has nothing but good experiences, and then gradually get challenged as they get older, as they mature. I encourage people in your training circle to be patient and deliberate about their training. That right here is probably one of the hardest things, for them to be patient. Training is a gradual process. Definitely concur with that. And if you've been training dogs for an extended period of time, I'm sure you do too. Increase by small increments. The biggest mistake you can make, and I see inexperienced helpers make it all the time, is venture beyond this threshold. So he's talking about, basically taking the dog past the peak, right? So you want to basically bring the dog right at that point where they're going to be successful, but if you go a little bit beyond that, it's too much. So that's basically what he suggests here. That's the ideal thing, but it takes skill. And if you're not sure if you can take that dog to that peak, then it's best to just stay in the safe zone. Because if you continuously take the dog to the peak and you consistently take the dog past the peak, you're actually going to overload the dog, right? It's going to be way too much pressure. So naturally, I'm not going to go over the whole chapter on the helper, but it does give you a lot of good info. It tells you, how to work with in prey, how to add pressure, how to engage the dog in defensive drive, and I've gotten some really good tips just from reading this chapter alone, along with other books. This is just one of my favorite books.